Welcome back to Tap Tempo with me, Matt Lang. This week, again, is going to be a little bit different. Full disclosure, I've been away so much, I wasn't actually able to line up a guest this week. So instead, I figured we'll just do a Q&A, and we're going to answer I'm going to answer the questions that you asked. Before I get into that, I did a surprise set at Sound last night here in LA, and man, that was just a great way to just end this run of shows. It was super fun, a huge crowd. To be honest, it's definitely my favorite set I've ever played at Sound, which, in my opinion, is the best club to play in LA for underground music. So that was an awesome time, and thank you to everyone who came out. Thank you to Space Yacht, thank you to Sound, and thank you to Mousetrap for organizing the whole thing. Also, since this is going to be a fairly tech-heavy episode, since a lot of the questions I received were tech-based, I should mention that Eventide, in partnership with Newfangled Audio, which was started by the senior DSP developer of Eventide, Dan Gillespie, they just came out with a new EQ called Equivocate. And Equivocate, they're calling it an auditory graphic EQ. It's essentially a 26-band graphic EQ that each of the bands is modeled after the human ear. And I've been using it for a long time. It's extremely musical. It's definitely a different way of looking at EQs, and it's very effective. So if you're into the production space, it is free until Halloween of this year, and then it'll go up to $100. So it's still pretty inexpensive for what it is, but it's got a great match EQ feature, and it's a fun new way of looking at an EQ that also sounds great. So let's just jump right into this Q&A. The first comes from BB Guthrie. Do you have any daily routines that you follow to help you feel successful? I have a routine. It's, I suppose it makes me, perhaps it makes me successful more than anything. It helps me feel centered, and I'm sure that translates ultimately to whatever success may be. But my daily routine is basically after I get up, I don't look at email or anything right away. I tend to just sit down with a cup of coffee and my book, whatever I'm reading at that moment. And I usually get up around 8:30, so I don't really try to think about work stuff until about 10. And that's usually my process. And then going out exercise is really big for me, especially when I'm on the road. It's a lot harder to have a routine just by the sheer nature of travel and airplanes and gigs, hotels, all that. So when I'm at home, it's definitely, I like to have my morning ritual of book, coffee, exercise, and then I just feel more centered so that when I do get to work, I feel better about it, better about myself. And I think that it helps me feel more successful about what I'm doing. From Nimes Beats, what is your favorite compressor for drums? For years, I've always really liked the Universal Audio, the UAD 1176. Sometimes I'll reach also for the Empirical Labs Arouser, which is a distressor. And Slate has a distressor plugin coming out that I've been using the beta for recently. And that also, I've always liked distressors on drums, particularly kicks. So having a distressor, or I guess multiple distressors now in the box, is pretty handy. From Am Journal, what do you like most about the new Paris album? I've been loving it too, and I'm curious to hear you elaborate on your thoughts. So I was driving back from San Diego a couple weeks ago after playing a show, and I was just going through Spotify, just trying to find something to listen to. And that popped up, and I had heard their name before. I didn't really know their music, and it was just really catchy. It was great songwriting, really good melodies. There were some songs in there that they seemed like hits right off the bat. So I did a little bit more research into it, and I found my old friend Blake Harnage, who he played in Versa Emerge, and I worked with him about 6 years ago. He produced the album, and of course, that put a personal touch on it for me, and I've just really been enjoying it. Great lyrics, great songwriting, great production. It's just a really solid album. From Brenchy Music, Matt, I believe you mentioned you don't use the OTT on too preset oriented on your master bus. What do you use for EQ, multiband compression, limiting on your master? Do you master in session or bounce to the master out of a different session? You're right. Yeah, I always use a different session, only because really the plugins I tend to use are going to be very CPU heavy in a master. And on top of it, mentally, I think it's healthy to split the process into two different processes where the song session is all about the writing and the mixing, and then the master is going to be a different mindset. So what I tend to use, for my EQ, I always use the UAD Massive Passive. I really like that one a lot. For multiband, I like the FabFilter Pro MB. I always use a little bit of normal compression also, sometimes from the Slate virtual bus compressor. I like the SSL one. And then finally, I use two limiters. And the first usually in the chain is the DMG Audio Limitless, which is a pretty beefy multiband limiter. And then finally, what I've been using is this new Eventide limiter, which it's actually based on what Equivocate came out of it. And it's, to be honest, the best limiter I've ever used in my life. The amount of control you have and how loud you can get without things breaking up, it's unbelievable. So keep an eye out for that. I really can't say anything more about it yet, but when it does come out, it's exciting. It's easily the best limiter I've ever used. From TVM Splice Sound, what do you use to create an atmosphere? What elements do you use to create the rhythm pattern? How to build a respace in the example of Bad Year Blimp. Atmosphere, reverb, delays, anything that gives space to a sound. And what elements do you use to create the rhythm pattern? Again, anything. Could be drums, could be bass, could be things I've recorded, could be things I've synthesized. I mean, it's how I hear it in my head. I can't really, teach you that. That's kind of on you. But that's just how I do it. And to make a respace, like in the example of Bad Year Blimp, it's pretty simple. Usually it's just variations of detuned sawtooth waves, and then they're filtered down. Sometimes I'll throw them into contact and make a unison out of them so they get nice and wide and a little bit warbly. But really, it's just detuned saws that are really filtered really low, and I like it when there's movement in the sound. So anything I can do, whether it's filter automation or anything just to keep the sound kind of liquidy, that is my trick for making Reese's. Also from Brenchy Music, what is your favorite Tool song? Mine's Push It, the Salival version. Yeah, that version's amazing. That's easily my favorite track off of Salival. Other than that, my favorites, I have a lot. I mean, they're my favorite band, so there's so many. But Lateralis has always spoken to me. And then on top of it, I love Schism. I mean, the whole album Lateralis is my favorite album in general. It's just perfect to me. But then if you go back to Anima, I love 46 and 2. I love Push It. Eulogy, got all of them. And even going into like 10,000 Days, I love Zombie. I love Rosetta Stone, Right in 2. I mean, it's all so good. From Fuck Ivan, who's your favorite skater and why? Andrew Reynolds, always. I'm sure part of it is because when I first got into skating, and this was, 17 years ago, 18 years ago, he was kind of the king at the moment, and he had the best frontside flip, the caballerials downstairs, and even as he's evolved later into his career now, where he's obviously not jumping down 20 stairs anymore, but I still love seeing his style, and I just love the way he skates. He's always been really influential to me. From Carlos, do you make your own percussion, or are they sample-based, and how do you get them to sound so clean and evenly distributed? And lastly, what do you use to make your pad sound so atmospheric? Yeah, so I make all my own percussion. On occasion, I might grab a hi-hat sample or something just to embellish something I've already created. But usually it's a lot of field recording. I like taking microphones in front of things or just recording things in the studio with mics, claps, snaps, whatever. Even, my cat's eating. That's a fun one. And to get them so clean and evenly distributed, it's a lot of very careful audio editing in Pro Tools. It's not really any more complicated than that. It's just recording the right material, recording it well, and then spatializing it in a way that isn't competing with other things. And lastly, how do you make your pad sound so atmospheric? Similar to a question above, filtering things down, granular synthesis, eventide reverbs. That is a big modulating hall reverb is such a crucial one for me, and that's a really big part of my sound. From Nuance Sonar, when going about a sound design session, how do you decide what's good, what could be scrapped, what could be improved? I find that I tend to overcommit to sounds, then get rather burnt out when they start sounding like crap. To shorten this comment a bit, how do you streamline your sound design sessions? I don't. I let sound design sessions be whatever they are, and I don't think you should necessarily limit what you're doing with that. I think you have to go down whatever wormhole it's going to take you and see it to the end. You never know what you're going to get. And it might take time, and then afterwards you can go back and you can see if you have anything usable out of the mess you made. But it is usually pure experimentation unless I know exactly what I'm trying to go for. From SDU Anthony, how do you go about making your sounds wide in the stereo image but still present when collapsing to mono? Well, the first thing is I don't use stereo plugins or stereo image plugins very often. I tend to actually just double track things or quad track. So vocals are always at least 3 tracks, and then it's usually one in the center, one left, one right. Percussion is, if it's very wide, it's usually double tracked where I'm just recording the same performance twice, and there's always going to be natural fluctuation. You're never going to play the same thing exactly the same. So I just double track everything and then hard pan either side. And that is really how I get everything to sound really wide. And when it collapses to mono, it's not going to phase out because it's not the same sound. From Fervum, how do you avoid getting bored of a song that takes too long to finish? Do you break up the writing into parts, such as melodies one day, drums another, or do you scrap ideas that don't hold your attention and move on to something different? Yeah, it's as simple as if it's not working and it feels like more work than it's worth, yeah, I just move on. You're going to make so many things in your life. If it doesn't feel right, don't even bother. From Bree J, please, are you ever bringing Altered Tensions back? Well, so Altered Tensions was, my original alias years and years and years ago. And it was the title of the first album I put out, or I guess the artist title of the first album I put out. And no, I mean, there's no real reason to at this point because I like what I'm doing right now. I think that album, that showcased where I was at that moment. And I wasn't as comfortable at the time as using my own name as I am now. And so there's no reason. I'd really rather just put everything out under my own name. From Seth Wilker, what is your favorite jazz album? Oh man, I haven't listened to jazz, or like really listened to jazz in a long time. Berkeley kind of beat that out of me. But I was really into Dave Brubeck. Take 5 was a big one, Blue Ronda a la Turk. And then later, I got really into the jazz guitarist Kurt Rosenwinkel. From Akuntz21, are you an IDM fan, like Aphex Twin, Square Pusher, Boards of Canada, etc.? Absolutely. That was the first kind of electronic music I really fell in love with. Aphex Twin's Richard D. James album was really life-changing for me. When the first time I heard Girl Boy Song, it was like, oh my God, what is this? Boards of Canada, of course. Gio Gotti was such a really influential record for me when I was first getting into making electronic music. And Square Pusher as well, Hard Normal Daddy, Beep Street in particular. That track was just, I love the drum programming with the melody, and it's brilliant. Andrew Gary wants to know, if your cats were a DJ duo, what songs do you think they would play back to back? Couldn't tell you, but I bet they'd be pretty good at scratching. Ben Thorner, how many projects are you generally working on at any given time? That varies, sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's 1. It completely depends on the day, deadlines, if I'm touring or not, because if I'm touring, I really can't work on music. That takes all your time away from you, and I can't work mobily. I need my studio. I can't do the laptop thing. So it varies. It's, can't really go further than that. What's my favorite bar in LA? Eric Hirschirsch wants to know. I like Tony's Darts Away in Burbank. It's a great beer bar. Really nice people, good bartenders, great beer. From Philmingo84, what has been your happiest moment as a musician, professionally or just in general? I don't know. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, and, you know, there are so many moments that sometimes they're lasting, sometimes they're really transient, but I think at this point when I'm happiest is when I feel accomplished about what I'm working on or what I'm doing as a person. And on top of it, that alongside being with people I love. I think, you know, community is really important to me, and being with like-minded folks or people who understand you, which especially I think, and I mean, it could be arrogant to assume, but I think in my line of work, that's harder to come by. I think we're a bit of a different breed. And then on top of it, in general, if I'm skating, landing a really hard trick that I've been working on for a long time, nothing feels better than rolling away for something you've been struggling to do. That feels great. From NYMRKMSC, what's my favorite time signature? I love 5/4. I love 7/4. I tend to like over 4 as opposed to over 8. I feel I can groove it out a little bit better. And then I've been really into 11/4 recently. That's a fun one. The way you can subdivide it gives you a lot of options. From Alihan Yalaglu, I'm sorry that I totally butchered that. What song track gave you goosebumps the first time you heard it, and why? Also, any new IPA recommendations? Oh, man. Telephone Tel Aviv, Map of What's Effortless. Or not Map, I'm sorry, Sound in a Dark Room, that track. That was still to this day one of my favorite tracks, incredibly influential. It's beautiful, it's sexy, it's a masterclass in production, and it's soulful. That is still to this day just absolutely amazing. And as for IPA recommendations, I'm really liking what Beechwood Brewery is doing right now. They just make a really solid IPA. From Doorstep Rebellion, do you think continuity in style is as important as an artist? I feel like I'm always growing and changing as a person, and that is reflected in my music. While still electronic, that stuff that seems to be coming more natural to me isn't necessarily EDM anymore. Rebranding is time-consuming and costly, though, so another alias isn't something I'm super keen on. Yeah, I think it would be naive to assume that you would make the same music your entire life. Like you said, you're always changing as a person, and your music will reflect that. I wouldn't worry about it. I think what's most important is being true to yourself as an artist and as a person, and the art you create from that is going to be the most meaningful ultimately. So I wouldn't even worry about the rebranding. I would worry about the creation itself, and if it's good, everything else should follow. From Mara, what's the first thing you listen to in the morning? I usually don't listen to anything in the morning. I don't actually get to listen to a lot of music when I'm at home, because if I'm at home, I'm working on music. So usually it's only if I'm driving or on a plane. So realistically, the first thing I hear are my cats purring in bed. And that's a pretty wonderful sound. What is the question you think you are not asked enough? From Thermosphere. I don't know. How am I? No. And also, what is a Euro module that you want that does not exist? I really want a good granular engine in Eurorack. I've had conversations with developers about this before, and it really is, it's more suited towards a computer than it is a module. But I would love to have a reactor-style granular module with CV control over every parameter. And I know that would also be unfortunately huge. So it probably will not happen anytime soon, but a guy can dream. From Hayes, business tips for a new recording artist. What do you wish you knew then that you know now? Get a lawyer. No, like really read your contracts. Know what you're getting involved with. That is, because especially once you've put a ton of time into something, nothing is more soul-crushing to be completely taken advantage of. From Roland, what is your advice for someone getting into modular? Buy a bigger case than you think you need, because you will fill it up all too quickly. If your life was a song, what song is it? That's from Redacted. Oh man, I don't know. My favorite song ever is Everlong. That's a song I've always really related to. So maybe that one. And also from Roland, how do you feel about your Anjuna releases? Are they less genuine, or were you tired of just making club records and did you want to diversify? They were a moment in my life. I had just finished working for BT at the time, and I'd gotten to know the Above and Beyond crew through Andrew Bayer, who I met down in DC at that time. And I was trying to figure out where I belonged in the music production world, and they offered me an outlet, and they were really great to me. And I'm really grateful for the time that I spent doing those things. I can't say they were less genuine, because at the time, that's what I thought I was supposed to be doing. And then I grew out of it. It's as simple as that. Stylistically, what I wanted to do evolved. And so I did. From Oliver Smith, how do you feel about the answer to the question that you forgot to ask after so many years have gone by? It was hugely formative for me. So yes, that was the title of the Altered Tensions record. And similarly to the Anjuna answer, yeah, that was a really important record to me. That was done when I was basically between the ages of 20 and 21 when I was finishing up Berkeley. And yeah, it was just purely a snapshot into my love of IDM at the time. I was really into Richard Devine and Aphex and Telephone. And that album is the reflection of that. And it's consequently because of that album that I did end up, getting hired by BT to do that job. And that led to everything else I'm doing. So ultimately, yeah, that album was pretty pivotal for me. It was, it holds a pretty special place in my heart. From Kiko, budget and logistics aside, describe the ideal experience or show you'd want to play or produce for the world. On the club side, main room of output. That is just my favorite room I've ever been in. I love the vibe of it. It's all black, minimal lighting, no phones, no bottle service. It's great. And from the live side, the Greek Theater. It's a beautiful space. I love the hills, and it's just gorgeous. I prefer it to the Hollywood Bowl. It's more intimate, but it's obviously big, but it's just beautiful. So yeah, playing with like a live band at the Greek Theater would be really exciting for me. From Mark, what do you use to widen your percussion, Haas effect, doubler? Yeah, I basically answered this before, but it's no plugins, no Haas effect, no doublers. It's just multi-tracking, panning left and right. And then from Mathematical, how long did it take you until you started making music that you were happy with? Was it a long process for you? Not necessarily. I think that changes as you get older. It's kind of like a metaphor. I think, a metaphor to use is from the movie Dogma. I forget, Linda Fiorentini, I think that's her name. She's talking about, like, in her case, she's talking about religion, but she's saying when you're younger, it's easier to have your faith because your glass is smaller and you don't need as much water to fill it. As you get older, the glass gets bigger and the same amount of water isn't going to fill that same glass. So it's the same thing. I think, when you're younger, you know less, and it's easier to be impressed, and your victories are easier because ignorance is bliss. As you get older, you know more. You've had a lot more experiences, and you don't get excited about the same thing over and over. That never happens. You have to keep evolving. So I think, I was certainly happy with the stuff I was doing when I was younger. I'm happy with what I'm doing now, but it takes a lot more work for me to be happy. And I think that is just honestly pretty natural. From Gabe Rodriguez, what are your thoughts on the current state of electronic music, and where do you think the genre is heading? I don't know. To be honest, I'm not really paying attention to it. I got an invite to go to the Electronic Music Awards tomorrow in LA, and then I looked at the ballot and all the nominations, and it wasn't electronic music at all. It was just purely, or it was just purely EDM, and there was nothing represented that wasn't EDM. And if that is the current state of electronic music, that is pretty depressing. That said, there are so many artists out there that are using computers, or they've been doing this for years, but using the technology to create something new is, I think that's the beauty of electronic music and electronic production. And I think my favorite is when the two worlds of traditional songwriting, traditional instrumentation are merged with electronic music. And that to me is beautiful. On the other side, if it's just, regurgitating the same EDM loop, that's pretty boring. So I hope that's not the current state, but you're asking the wrong person, honestly. I just don't know. I don't pay attention to it. From McHugh, are there any genres or styles of music you haven't tried yet but might want to produce someday? Not really. I don't really think like that. I'm thinking more about just what I'm choosing to express. I think it's definitely important to learn how to play and analyze different styles of music because you can learn a lot from that, and that will ultimately benefit your music. But I'm not going out tomorrow to say, I'm going to make a polka song. I just don't think about it. I don't care. From Lirati, how different is your process remixing popular tunes like Imogen Heap and Usher versus remixing stuff like Echo and Atlas? The pop stuff's a lot more fun to remix, actually. I love songs. And when you have a good song, that is usually a lot more immediately inspirational to me than remixing a club track. Because there's less of a hook in a club track usually. And I would much rather have a great singer, like in the case of Imogen Heap. She's, one of my favorite artists. So having the ability to work with her is, mind-blowing to me. And that was, and that definitely, when I went about doing that remix, I really wanted to make a statement because of how important to me of an influence she was. So that is the main difference. How has classical influenced your genre? David Doherty wants to know. Steve Reich was really influential for me when I was younger. The shifting of melodies, time shifting, music for 18 musicians. That was when I was in high school. I was introduced to that album, and classical minimalism in general, even Philip Glass. That was definitely influential, and certainly in techno with lots of repeating rhythms and motifs. Yeah, you can hear the influence in that. From Ben F., some tips on getting better at arrangements and finishing tracks in a timely manner. I think something that certainly helped me when I was first getting used to arranging was I would take a track I liked and I would basically put it at the top of my my Pro Tools session, and I would put markers down when things happened in the reference track, and then I'd kind of use that as an outline for in my own music where I should have transitions and motifs and all that. And I think that was a really effective way to internalize arrangement. So I would try that if you haven't done that. From David Lilja, at what age did you start composing music? When are you feeling the most inspirational? If you could change one thing in your career, what? I guess when I was 5, because my parents had me at a piano, and consequently, eventually I started playing my own melodies. So I suppose that would be the first. When am I feeling the most inspirational? Either when I'm extremely happy or extremely unhappy. When I'm kind of flatlining, no, there's very little inspiration in there for me. It's very much an emotional thing. And if I could change one thing in my career, I used to think I had things I would change. Now I don't, because every experience I've had, be it positive or negative, has ultimately influenced and shaped me to be the person I am now and the artist I am now. And I really like where I am now. So it's the whole butterfly effect. And I wouldn't necessarily want to change anything, because even with negative experiences, I learned something from that, and that's a positive. And I wouldn't necessarily have learned that lesson had I not gone through that. So no, I don't think I would change a thing. I'm just going to keep going. What was your most memorable gig? Lumbeats wants to know. Well, since I did it last night, sound. That was awesome. From Krug, do you have a list of mandatory classic electronic music listening? Yeah, we actually talked about some of it already. Aphex Twin, Richard D. James, Boards of Canada, the whole Warp Records thing, Square Pusher. And then, you could go back to like Kraftwerk, but I never got that into them, really. Orbital, I really liked. Halcyon On and On was certainly the first house record I ever got into. I would say those. From Moishe, do you have a favorite brewery that you've toured? Any beers really standing out right now for you? Yeah, I've done a lot of brewery tours. My favorite is the Russian River Brewery up in Santa Rosa. They make Pliny the Elder, which is my favorite beer. And yeah, a couple of years ago, for my birthday, my best friend and my girlfriend at the time, we drove up and rented a tree house, actually, Airbnb. It was like a really big tree house. And went to the brewery for 3 days and got to drink my favorite beer and just be there. It's a beautiful area. It's amazing. So yeah, Russian River is totally my favorite brewery. And any beer standing out right now for you? Yeah, like I said before, I really like the Beechwood IPAs. Amalgamator. Yeah, the Amalgamator. That's a really strong one. Also from Mark, throwing another quick one as well. Favorite reverbs? Eventide? Yes, Eventide. I've had a DSP 4000 for a decade, and that was my main reverb box for a long time. I now have their Space Pedal also, which I use a ton. And then all their reverb plugins, Black Hole, Ultraverb, the 2016 Room. I use it all. I love how their stuff sounds. From Cam, what is the best way you found to be authentic in a healthy and beneficial way? Just not lying to yourself. I think being honest about who you are, what you desire, how to get there. I mean, it requires a fair amount of self-awareness, and that takes, I think, a while to come by. But I think knowing what your truth is, whatever that may be, that will lead you to whatever healthy and beneficial life you're looking for. From Freeman, drum bussing when making techno. Do you bus your kick to a group or separately? And name one of your favorite tunes off the Fragile and why. I usually bus all my drums together, and then I'll slap like an 1176 on it. And the amount of gain reduction depends on how pumping I want it to be. Sometimes I really like it when everything ducks underneath the kick. Sometimes I want it to not have the sucking effect as dramatically. But that is, I always bus everything together. I like it all to be compressed together and kind of move as like a growing organism. That's always just how I've framed it in my mind. And one of my favorite tunes off the Fragile, We're in This Together Now. I love how the snare is tuned to a tritone. I think that's so cool. From Cam again, what do you want your music to do for your fans? And also, how did you turn a passion into an outlet for creativity and growth? To be honest, I don't really think about what it's going to do for anybody except myself. And I don't think that's selfish. I think as an artist, you have to purely involve yourself. If people relate to it, that's fantastic. If it speaks to them and, you know, it affects them in some way, that's amazing. But that's not the intention. The intention is for me actually to really sort out whatever I'm trying to sort out in my brain. And then how did I turn a passion into an outlet? I just did it. I sat down. I decided this is what I want to do, and I did the work. That's all it is. From Tommy, how are your approaches different when creating a rock track versus electronic techno? Do you have a preference for either genre? Yeah, the approach is different because when I'm doing a rock track or something thereof, the intention is not to be in a club. And I find also when I make records like that I need them to have more of their own personal statement. So ultimately a lot more work goes into that, into finding its sonic identity, its message, anything like that. When I'm doing a club track, it attracts a smaller piece of a much bigger picture, which is a DJ set. So to me, it's no longer about having as much of a statement as much as it is, how is this going to support my set? How is this going to basically make the story I'm trying to tell with a lot of different tracks better? And do I have a preference for either genre? I like them both for different reasons. As an artist, I like the more experimental stuff because that's more exciting for me. As a DJ, I can't DJ that stuff. So it's a different relationship. From David Safran, how do you keep yourself from getting burnt out with the music? Any strategies? Yeah, go outside. If it feels forced, do something different. If you're just up against a brick wall, you're not going to really get anywhere. From Yuba, any tips on good software techno synth plugins for a noob? I don't know. I don't use a ton of plugins. So Reactor, Native Instruments, that one's really fun. I pull that one out a lot, and I use Contact a lot for sound design and manipulating. And then Duda's synth, Serum, that's pretty hip. You can do some very interesting things with that. From Michael Rogan, when you plan or mix tracks in your live sets, what process do you use for your track selection and intensity? So the first thing I do is, because I use Tractor, and I always have every track is organized by key. So I'm thinking very musically the entire time, and I think that helps me have a more cohesive sound, and it certainly makes mixing a lot smoother. And I like really long transitions, which is why I use the Allen & Heath 92, so that way I can have 4 bands of EQ and really be a lot more surgical in bringing in different tracks. And the other thing I do a lot is I'm usually firing off at least 3 tracks at the same time because I'm looping little bits, usually the outros of the track I played before. And that allows me to keep the energy going or have a continuity in energy, especially when the tracks you're playing might have drastically different energy levels. So that is one way I do it. From Keen Bartleman, if you could only drink one kind of shitty water beer for the rest of your life, which one would it be? Last night I had to drink Dos Equis, and I can tell you what, it would not be that. From Jeff Hartford, Mr. Atlas himself, what was the most important lesson you had to learn about accepting yourself and finding your voice musically? I think I just had to do a lot of different things. I had to try different styles of music, work with a lot of different people. I had to live. I had to have relationships. I had to travel to different places, meet different people. I just had to experience life, I think. And your music is going to be a reflection of that. Your art is going to be a reflection of who you are as a person. And it's an age thing too. I mean, 6 years ago when I was 25, I wouldn't have the same answer. I probably thought I knew a lot more than I think I do now. And I think it's just getting to the point where you can find somewhat a kind of peace within yourself. I think there's always going to be a certain amount of unrest, especially when you're of the artistic kind. But it's just a matter of kind of accepting who you are, living, experiencing, loving, and eventually you find a kind of peace and comfort within yourself, knowing that those experiences have led you to who you are today. So that is ultimately, I would say, how I found my voice musically, because my art is an extension of who I am. And Colin Williams, in an addendum to Jeff's question, was there ever a pivotal moment where you were afraid to go in a certain direction with your music career, especially early on? No, never. I think maybe it's kind of like, a bit of the New Yorker in me, but I'm always going to have a bit of a fuck you attitude. And if this is what I'm going to do, this is what I'm going to do. And I'm going to stand behind it. I'm not going to put something out I don't believe in. That's just not truthful to me. And it's just, if you're afraid, you just have to do it. Then you're not afraid of it anymore. It's as simple as that. Just immerse yourself. And then Mick Greenwood. What's up, Mick? What led you to this genre style of music? Again, it's actually the same. It's the same kind of answer as I had before to Jeff and Colin. It's just living. And, what I grew up on was basically, like, I grew up on a lot of progressive metal and, like, kind of nerdier electronic music. And, Nails was certainly the first, or Nine Inch Nails was certainly, like, one of the first bands I heard that merged the two of them together. But then, of course, Tool and A Perfect Circle, those were hugely influential. And then on the other side, we had Richard Devine and Telephone Tel Aviv. So that is, eventually, those things all just kind of added up, and that's how. And then I've been playing guitar for 18 years. So you put all the things together, and that is how I found my path. From Kershal KSW, what were the 3 most important musical epiphanies which changed the way you make music? The first was learning that I could record. I did that in high school, and it was as simple as just having a laptop with a guitar and basically a Line 6 pod plugged into it, and learning that I could actually just, I could make my own beats and record guitar on top of it. And that was the beginning of everything. Later, what changed my entire workflow from going, because when I was at Berkeley, I got really into MIDI and programming and doing all the really, like, computery kind of stuff. And I met Charlie Cooper of Telephone Tel Aviv, and I was super fanboy. And I just remember walking up to him and being like, dude, like, you guys must be doing so much MIDI automation. Like, and Charlie just went, no, fuck MIDI. It's all audio. And that idea never even, like, hit my mind before. So, that changed everything. Cause then I went back and started, like, cutting up everything as audio once again, which is actually, to be fair, how I started, but I got distracted for a few years. And, that was pivotal. That was an epiphany. And then lastly, I don't know if it's necessarily an epiphany. I think it's just a natural evolution of combining my various passions of music into one and realizing that, yes, it's possible. And yes, I love this and it feels right to me. From Bill King, if you could do it over again, would you have gone to Berkeley and why? Yeah, absolutely. That was a life-changing experience for me. I met my best friends there. My career is completely indebted to that. Being in a community with lots of musicians, that was an amazing time for me. I don't think I'd ever want to go to school ever again, but it was that was a fantastic experience. From Will Vance, what were some career and personal milestones did you accomplish that, that's not a comma, sorry. What were some career and personal milestones did you accomplish that led up to you releasing tunes off of Anjuna? Again, that was just because I worked for BT and I met Andrew, and that he just introduced me to them. It's as simple as that. And the second question out of that is, any advice for marketing, branding yourself as an artist, making more underground styles of music? Big, silly white helmets and gimmicks might work for more mainstream artists, but rarely work with artists making music more similar to your style. I'll tell you what, the music matters. If it's good music, people will pay attention. And this isn't the sexiest answer, but the best marketing you could ever have for yourself is really strong work. From Nathan Webb, as someone who produces and makes music as a hobby, I find myself getting so disappointed when I hear an artist I've respected and admired who actually doesn't create the music they release under their name. As I've become friends with more and more well-known producers, I've heard more and more of names of artists who don't make their own tunes. You being a successful and talented artist yourself, do you get that feeling about people you've looked up to who use ghost producers, or you just accept it as part of the business? In other genres of music, not making your own music would be a death sentence, but it's accepted in electronic, it seems. Also, do you enjoy ghost producing, or is it just something you do to help pay the bills? First off, it is an unfortunate reality of electronic music, but you have to think about why that is. And it's DJ culture, and DJs typically are not musicians. They are human jukeboxes. So ultimately, we're at a point now where to be able to continue to tour, you have to have your own music out there. And consequently, there are going to be a lot of guys who need to keep their machine going. So they're going to have to hire people to make their records for them so that they can DJ, because they're not capable of it themselves. That is an unfortunate reality, and it's something I don't support. And if it were up to me, all those guys would go away. And do I enjoy ghost producing? No, I don't do it. Simple as that. I did it 10 years ago when I was like trying to afford a $600 a month apartment in Boston. And, I did it because I had to. I haven't done it since then. It's an awful line of work, and it's totally soul crushing. From Julian Anders, when it comes to mixing and playing in Dolby Atmos, what are the main things you focus on, and what are your main goals you try to achieve with this new possibility? When mixing songs in Atmos, what are your mixing guidelines? What are you especially aiming for on the mix? I just think about how the music's going to be the most immersive. I also just sonically, I tend to like my highs to be really high, and whether it's hi-hats or anything in the high frequency like field. So I tend to mix my hi-hats above you and a little bit behind you. Just because I kind of want it twinkling in your ears. I like my bass to be really, really low. And if it's stereo, I kind of like it massaging your head, moving around you a bit. Every song's different. It depends what elements you have in there. But I've always tend to like things really wide and really open. And Atmos definitely allows you to do that to the extreme. From Byron Ho, as a person who is learning to produce music, it has always seemed to me that good music is so often unfathomably complicated, whether that's composition, layering instruments, mixing, arrangement, or just simply being creative. Do you have a usual workflow when it comes up to do you have a usual workflow when coming up with these ideas, and how would you know when it's time to stop on a track and call it finished? Rome wasn't built in a day. It's block by block. It doesn't seem so complicated at the beginning, and then after you've been doing it for 5 days straight working on the same thing, yeah, of course it's going to be complicated. But I don't worry about that. I just think about what I'm trying to get to and what am I going to do to help me achieve that. So the complication, that only grows over time. Everything usually starts pretty simple. And how do I know when it's time to stop on a track and call it finished? Intuition. You know when it's done. From Hussam Zagabi, did you ever have a fear of sharing your work? If so, how did you get over it? But if not, what do you think someone with that case should do? It's a constant fear to me to share my work and always be thinking it's not good enough compared to your work or someone else's. The only stuff I've had a fear of sharing was the more emotionally vulnerable work, because like vocal stuff, because that is, you can't hide behind that. You can't lie about what that says. But as far as sharing my work in general, no. I'm proud to share what I do because I care about it. And the only way you get over that fear is, once again, by just putting it out there. And chances are all the first things you put out there are going to be pretty bad. And you just have to do it. You have to get over the fear. And you get better over time. You get better at taking criticism. And people are jerks. They're always going to, shit all over anything you put out. Like, just look at YouTube. It's a cesspool. It's just pure negativity. But you get over it and you move on. And then you just keep doing it. It's not something to be scared of. It's not going to really destroy you. It's only going to make you stronger. From Cooper Sartell, what are some suggestions on how to improve arrangement? Were there specific things you learned in school that were crucial to how you write now? Yeah, actually, I covered that above. Definitely, if you're trying to learn arrangement, just reference other tracks. That's a really good way to internalize it before you want to start really playing with it on your own. From Matt Adair, do you plan on playing in the UK in the future? And what's your opinion on our music scene in the UK at the moment? I'd like to. It's not really up to me. I have to get booked by a promoter in the UK. So the last time I was there was over a year ago at Ministry of Sound, also for Dolby Atmos, and it was a great experience. I really like the culture there. I like the people. I love the fashion, the women. I really like the UK. So I'd love to be there again. It's just not entirely my choice. And what's my opinion on the music scene? I don't really know at the moment because, again, I'm kind of just in my own little bubble most of the time. So I'm not really sure what's going on. There's been so much influential music that's come out of the UK, like Burial. That was unbelievable. It's still one of my favorite artists. But as far as what's going on now, I don't really know. From Kyle Grimm, you produce remixes from a wide range of genres. What draws you to a rock, pop, or electronic song that makes you want to take a shot at remixing it? If it's a really great song. Simple as that. From Lane Stoobs, best techniques and workouts that can help me improve my guitar playing as well as sound design. With guitar, I would say playing with other people. You can't beat that. That pushes you out of your comfort zone, and you have to learn how to play complementary to each other as opposed to just yourself, which is a really good learning experience. And on top of that, playing with a rhythm behind you, not just, you can do the metronome thing, but that's really boring. I found what I used to do a lot was I would just program a drum beat and then I would play behind that, and that really helps you at locking in your rhythm playing and your feel and nuance. That is, I love that, that's a lot of fun. And then playing along to your favorite songs, that's a great way to learn and feel like you're in a band and have your rock star moment. And sound design, as far as improving your sound design, listen. It's all about your ears. Listen to every little fluctuation in sound and the changes you make. From Grant Benson, will you ever be making more rock-oriented songs like Consider This or Punish Me? Yes, that is pretty much almost exclusively my focus right now. I'm minus a couple weekends here and there. I'm pretty much home for the rest of the year, which is awesome because now I finally get to go back and work on the rest of Calliope, trying to get the next EP of that out mid-November, which means I have to have the EP, the current one, which is, I would say, 50% done, basically done mid-October. And I think I'll hit it. Maybe it'll come out later, but we'll see. But yeah, that is 100% of my focus, minus the podcast. So say the podcast takes 10%. That's 90% of my focus right now. That's my favorite thing in the world. The lovely Tanya Zagar asks, what song do you hate most in the world? That would have to be Neil Diamond's Sweet Caroline. It's probably a byproduct of having lived in Boston for 5 years, and as a New Yorker and a Yankee fan, everywhere I went, people would be singing that song, and it just completely rubbed me the wrong way. Now it's in those car commercials. Every time I hear it, it's just, ugh. And from Alan Michael Deacon, would you like to take a guess as to how many times I've made sweet, passionate love to your remix of Usher's Numb? Definitely more than I have. So good on you. That's it. Thanks to everyone who submitted your questions. Hope you got something out of this. And next week, we actually will have guests again. Imagine that. So until then, have a great week.